welcome to Talks at ESSEC. Today we have with us Mr. Kaushik Das. Mr. Das is the managing partner at McKinsey's Southeast Asia office. He has been with McKinsey for close to 20 years. And
Yes.
thank you for talking to our students today. Uh, many thanks for that. I mean, it was great. The session was great. And he has primarily worked in the energy, materials, and consumer goods sectors. Prior to working at McKinsey Southeast Asia office, he was at the UK office, in the London office, where he served companies in UK, Germany, and Italy. I have 4 questions today for Mr. Das, and I'll not have any follow-up discussion on that, so it will be very short and sweet. I'll have a question for him, he'll answer, and then move on to the next one. Okay. The first question is, Facebook. Facebook's revenue is $55 billion, and the last time I checked, they employed 35,000 people. Indian Railways has a revenue of $26 billion, and they employ 1.3 million people. So we are looking at 2 very different exemplars. So my question to you is, which one do you think addresses the problems of the future better?
Well, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak to your students today. I really enjoyed the conversation, really, particularly the follow-up questions. I mean, some of those are pretty sharp questions. You've got some very bright students here. So best of luck with the program. Look, to your specific question, we think they're both equally important, and there is no choice between one or the other. There is no prioritizing one company over the other company. As you said, Indian Railways, directly employs 1.3 million people, but probably the real power is they touch 1.3 billion people in India. We know for a long time they were chugging along, and then some years ago they introduced digital technologies in reservations, advanced bookings, etc., and that was a huge step up at that time. It cut down waiting times, queues, etc., just saved people a whole lot of time, drove productivity. Is there more to be done? Absolutely. Would that benefit the whole country? Absolutely. And they need to do more. At the same time, Facebook, while they employ only about 35,000 employees, but they have got 2.2 billion users. Yeah, some of their acquisitions also have billions of users, YouTube and the others, WhatsApp. So, and we also know that they have a different kind of influence on the same 1.3 billion people in India. Right? You see some of the good and the bads of social media, some of the unintended consequences that have shown up over the last year in terms of rumors spreading and bad things happening as a result of that. We think in both cases regulation needs to play a bigger role or a broader role. I think now even the CEO of Facebook has said that. We think in both cases they can both use technology better. Ironically, they can probably also use human capital better. We know that Facebook now has thousands of people to sort through the content part. So both people and technology will continue to play a very important role. And we don't think the choice is between one or the other. We think both need to change.
Okay. Next question. The idea of smart cities has been adopted by many governments all over the world. But when I see the whole concept of smart cities, I see a difference between the approach in developed economies and the approach in developing economies.
Right.
So for example, the late urbanizers have tended to join the bandwagon without any initial well thought through land use planning.
Right.
So what are your comments on this effort to do digital transformation without doing the groundwork first?
Right. Look, it's a very important topic in Asia, where we have some vast centers of humanity, certainly in Southeast Asia. We also know that the term has been picked up by lots of governments, but not everybody fully understands what it means. Our definition is, one of using technology, digital technology, data, etc., to deliver services better to people and helping them lead healthier, more sustainable, environmentally sustainable and more productive lives. Now, we actually see different archetypes here. there would be what we would call the sandbox cities at one end, and Singapore is probably a good example of a sandbox city. It's already got a pretty well developed infrastructure backbone, and the government here uses Singapore to try different kinds of technologies, different kinds of options, and then figure out what works. And often the learnings are true for Singapore, but the learnings are also true for many other cities around the world. So that's a sandbox city. At the other end, you have these, I would say, the emerging cities. They're often small by Asian standards, by the way. Several 100,000 population. They have an infrastructure of some sort, but there is a lot of opportunity to shape things, right? The physical planning aspects become important, right? And this is where we see the biggest opportunity for physical planning to go hand in hand with technology being embedded right at the beginning. By the way, these are small cities. Sometimes these are also outskirts of large cities that are developing into cities in their own right. The problem, we think, is in the broad middle in the center. The big cities, the Jakartas, the Bangkoks, or if you were to expand it, big cities in India, where there is a physical setup, it is there. You cannot dramatically change that. Governments may not have the ability, the political mandate to change those no matter what we say, conceptually, they cannot make those changes. The question here is to practically pick specific use cases, specific areas where you can practically make a difference in a 6-month, 9-month, 1-year time frame, even as you're working on longer term solutions. Often governments tend to pick up big, difficult problems that take a decade to solve, but that takes so much time to solve that people lose energy along the way. So the question is, along the way, are there traffic solutions that change people's lives in the short term? Is there a different way of broadband access, fiber optics, whatever else that changes things? Are there land use? You may not be able to change the basic the core fabric of the city, but tweaks in land planning, land use, to allow, for example, maybe vertical development more than is traditionally. Our cultures are often low-rise buildings spread out, and our research shows that often, at least from an economic perspective, high-rise buildings allow us to deliver better service with in the most productive way. So tweaks can sometimes help make change happen. So it's getting the short-term use cases, picking them sharply, energizing people through change that they can see, while keeping an eye on the longer-term change.
Okay, thanks. Third question. Some companies have proactively pursued the triple bottom line objective of financial, social, and environmental goals. Most companies do not. So what has been your experience when you deal with clients on these issues? Can you share with us some success stories and some challenges?
Look, it's a very, very important question, also a difficult question. I would say at the conceptual level, everybody now gets that you need to improve on all parameters. People also get that they're not, sometimes there are trade-offs, sometimes there aren't trade-offs. You can actually get economic benefits while adopting better technology, and technology that is actually better for the environment. But I would say the practices, that real on-ground practices vary quite a bit. If I think about us, just reflecting on ourselves, I think we've always taken the environment quite seriously, I would say. But in 2017, 2018, we made a big push to become carbon neutral ourselves. And our biggest problem is, people travel a lot. We fly across. And that just is not good for the environment. It's good for many other reasons, not good for the environment. And so we've started to change things ourselves. We figured that, and that has come top down. There is a push. We wanted to be carbon neutral. We've gone out and done things. At the same time, we have taken on bottom-up initiatives. So about 60 offices of McKinsey now have local teams that are trying to do things that might feel small, but that add up to quite a bit. So here in Singapore and in multiple offices in Southeast Asia, we have local teams that are trying to replace our bulbs with LED lights. That are trying to move away from bottled water to drinking fountains, water fountains, just to cut down the use of plastic. moving away from single-use plastic. We've changed our catering systems so that we don't necessarily have to have plastic spoons and forks, but you can have, proper utensils. Now that changes many things. You need a dishwasher in the office. You need somebody that comes in and cleans the utensils. But we're starting to make those changes at the local level. So it's both. Now, if you look outside, beyond, there are very famous examples. Unilever, when they got a new CEO earlier this decade, he had this big sustainability program where they would double in size while cutting down the use of water, groundwater, etc., etc. And they actually, for a number of years, they stayed on that path, and there has been some very, very very impressive achievement, both on business results while delivering on environmental results. In Southeast Asia, I would say the results are more mixed. I think at one end we see large, often state-owned companies that declare intent and then they move slowly, but they move. At the other end, we see vibrant young startups that right at the beginning, they want to get everything right. And often the transformation challenges are for established companies that are seeking to change. And then they start getting into all kinds of trade-offs. In general, I would say awareness is high, and I would say, at least in Southeast Asia, there is momentum. Companies are trying to make shifts. In many family-owned businesses, often there's a next generation of family that's coming in now, the second or the third generation. They have often been educated in Europe or in the US. They've traveled the world. They've seen practices in many countries. They've often worked with professional services firms like ours before going back to the families. And I know on day one, they come into their companies saying, we want to change the way things have been done by our fathers, our grandfathers. We want to have a different. So we feel quite hopeful that over the next decade, we will see real change, real corporate-driven change in this part of the world.
Okay, thank you. My fourth question is, consulting companies such as yours are enablers of good practices, also conduits of practice, right? So can you share with us some examples from your company where you have injected good practice in the industry as far as environmental damage and resource depletion is concerned?
Right. Look, very tough question in many ways, right? We've, in many countries in this part of the world, so I'm going to use Southeast Asia as an example. We've noticed that productivity is an important measure. Capital productivity and labor productivity often lags the world. And to grow the GDP, to improve people's working standards, you need to drive productivity. And often, the best way to do that is to inject technology, new technology, while building capability of employees, thousands of employees. It is not practical to fire people, however. You cannot just cut down on jobs as you drive productivity. You've actually got to help thousands of employees become more productive in leveraging technology. The good thing in this part of the world is often it's not about cost cutting, it is about growth. We are in a context of an average of 4 to 5% GDP growth across ASEAN over the last 20 years. The fastest developing countries are growing at 6-7%, but even the laggards are growing at 3 to 4%. So in the context of growth, we actually see opportunity with technology. So for example, we've used data analytics to drive productivity at distant mine sites where fuel productivity improves. You can use less fuel, drive better maintenance of your equipment, enable people to lead better lives, less stressful lives, while actually getting more out of the asset, out of the equipments. We've seen similar efforts in oil and gas, but even in more traditional industry, banking, for example, dramatic change. They used to open up lots of branches. Now the whole challenge is, how do you leverage technology to serve people better? In doing so, the employees can also lead better lives, and customers get much better service.
Okay. Thank you for those answers.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you for
inviting me here today.
Thank you.